Hi there, and welcome to my first YouTube video on this channel. I'm going to be drawing an eye today, just blocking out a line and cutting it into thirds-ish. I will refine that once I've drawn the pupil and the iris. This is just to help me with the shapes. I'm just blocking things out at the moment. So I'm blocking out the top of the eye. The top eyelid always intersects, pretty much always intersects the iris and the pupil when the person is looking straight ahead. As you can see, I've drawn the eye way too wide, or the iris is way too small, so I'm going to refine that now. Just going to chop the ends of the eyes off so that it looks more appropriately sized. And now I'm going to paint over, that's not the right color, I'm going to choose the right color and paint over the excess construction lines so that they don't become a distraction once I'm further into the drawing. So now that I've done that, I'm going to create a new layer, and I'm going to be creating quite a lot of layers in this so that I can keep things nice and structured and not draw or smudge something that I don't need to draw or smudge. So this is the pupil. I'm just going to sort of keep adding paint over the top of what I've done. I'm using an Apple Pencil on an iPad Pro here, so it does take a few passes to get the amount of value that I'm looking for, and I will keep sort of adding to it as I go along. My tendency is now to use the paintbrush tool with the background color rather than using the erase tool, which is, you could argue whether that's good or bad later on perhaps. So I'm just going to mark round the shadows of the outside of the iris now, and then add some value to the outside of the pupil as well, just to give it more of a three-dimensional look. And again, I'm just blocking out and marking where the highlights and the shadows are going to be, or at the moment just the shadows really. I will be adding some more color and detail to this later on once I've got everything kind of blocked out. And this just helps me to see where I have too much value and not enough value, or where perhaps some of my dimensions are a little bit off. It's very difficult when you're doing line art. Certainly at my level of drawing, where I'm still very much a learner, sometimes it's very difficult to see proportions just from outlines. So doing it this way, I find it's a little bit easier. Doing kind of adding the value early on. So as you can see, I'm now just adding the outline to the eye, just making it a little bit more solid. I'm kind of committing to the shape of the eye at this point, and also marking where some of the shadow or the perhaps the makeup on the top eyelid's going to be. I'm just going to add some eyelashes here, and the thing I struggle with eyelashes is I tend to go too far. I tend to add too many, so I'm kind of making a conscious effort now not to go too far. The bottom eyelid tends not to be too well populated with eyelashes, and again, these are just kind of scruffy eyelashes that I'm painting on. I will add some thicker and darker ones in a moment. I'm just giving myself a sense of how big, how long and tall they need to be, depending on whether this is a male or a female eye, whether they're wearing a lot of makeup. So as you can see, I'm just adding a little bit more now to the top eyelid to give me some more value. So that's not too bad, so that's okay. I think we can live with that. I'm just sorting out my layers now, and then I'm going to add some shade to the eyeball as well. The eyeball temptation is with me is to just leave the eyeball pure white, but I've learned from practicing that it's actually better to have it slightly darker, to have a grey in the space, so that when I add colour to it and then I add the highlights, I've actually got some wiggle room, I think, because if you're painting white on white, you can't see it. So having a slightly dark or a slightly light grey in the place of the whites in the eyeball means that you've got some space there for adding highlights. And I'm using the smudge tool quite a lot just to sort of blend the shadows together. I don't want any standout blemishes in the eyeball. The eyeball is a fairly uniform color for the most part, in my experience anyway. So at this point, I'm just darkening up that top eyelid. I think I've decided that it's going to be a female eye, so we're just adding a little bit of mascara and then giving some dimension to that upper eyelid as well, because obviously it gets lighter because of it's curved, it's concave, so it's or convex, depending on what, I can't remember which is which, but just adding that mascara in and then adding some more value above just to give it that little bit of depth. And then of course I will obviously repeat the process for the bottom eyelid as well. And I'm just adding some sort of stray eyelashes and perhaps even shadows of eyelids there. And then there's the upper eyelid fold that I'm just doing now. And then again, I will add some more value to add some depth to that, because obviously it's not just a line, it's actually a crease in the skin, so it needs to be sort of added. You need to add some 3-dimension to it so that it looks like it's actually a crease. And then I'm going to just rattle along with some more value, darken it up a little bit, and then when I'm sort of fairly happy that it looks good in black and white, I can continue adding some more value to it afterwards. Again, the eyelid itself will cast a shadow on the eyeball, so that's just what I'm adding there. There might be a little bit too much, but it's okay, I can get away with that. The bottom of the eyelid is the bottom of the eyeball, sorry, is the tricky part, because there is really a very, very small shadow there, just to sort of show that it's making contact. So next thing I want to do is just add some value to the bottom eyelid again, just to separate it and give some depth to the drawing. I tend to, and something I'm learning to do at the moment, is getting the dark values correct, because I tend to make things to look too flat, because I'm afraid that it looks too dark and boring or dark and dingy. So again, just going to work this area with the smudge tool to smooth out some of those parts of the value where it looks a bit wrong or a little bit too bumpy. Overall, the structure of the eye area of the face is fairly smooth in terms of, I mean, if you're adding wrinkles and things like that, then obviously that's not always the case, but the transitions for the big shapes is generally quite smooth. There's no sort of really abrupt change of direction, apart from perhaps in the eyelid fold at the top. The beauty of using Photoshop like this is that I can switch off and on the layers to identify which layer I'm going to work on, and make sure that I'm putting my bottom layers at the bottom and my top layers at the top to make sure that everything's in the right order. So I'm going to go back over the iris and just the pupil even, and just darken it up, and I'm going to start adding some color value to the eye. Now that I've got the majority of the block work in place and some of the shading in place, I can now start adding some color to the eyeball to make it stand out, and of course the tear duct area. And I'm going to add some highlights to these later. I'm just going to kind of get the dark colors in first and add a little bit of pinkness to the eye, because most people generally do have a little bit of a pink shade. And then I'll smudge the corners of the eyes once I've done that. And I might be going a little bit over the top with the pink here, but I'd rather have too much than too little in this case. So smudging away at those corners just to make that colour blend in quite nicely. I do tend to forget that I've adjusted the brush size, or I'm in the wrong brush when I've adjusted the brush size, so I do have to sometimes go back and redo these things, because as you can see there, my smudge brush was way too small. So my eyes are actually going to be blue, but I'm adding a kind of greeny yellow backdrop to the colour that I'm going to add on top, and now I'll go over it with blue, and I'm going to follow the contours or the texture of the iris now to give more of a feeling of realism to it. And this isn't perfect by any stretch of the imagination, but this is just kind of how I've learned to map it I'm just adding the lighter colours first, and then I'll go around and I'll add some slightly darker spots, particularly around the outside of the iris and the outside of the pupil, just to make those areas look a little bit more real. And I will add quite a lot of detail to the iris, because it is one of the parts, or arguably the part of the eyeball with the eye with the most detail in it. So I've added some sort of green blotches to it as well. Again, this person's eye is not perfect, and now I'm just adding those little dark shadowy areas that the iris, when the iris is contracting to make the pupil smaller, you sort of stretch out. So I'm just adding those in now, and then I'll blur it a little bit, just to make it look like it's meant to be there. Cool, so I'm happy with that, so I'm just going to adjust the blend mode and the opacity until I feel like it's in the right place, and then I'm going to keep adding some more value to the color, a little bit of adding a bit of more shade over the top, just to darken up some of the areas that need to be darker. And then I'll just change blend modes again. Just going to keep working, keep adding value until I feel like I've got something that looks realistic. And I'm probably going to add some more color over the top of all of this, just to sort of make those greens a little bit less obvious. Again, just keeping darkening things up, and there we go, adding some more blue just to give it that more uniform looking color. And then I'll change that to perhaps color mode. Might just make it soft light, we'll see. Adding a little bit more light blue just to the underside of the pupil, just to make it look like that area is brighter. And again, just to make that blue stand out a little bit more. I'm just going to add some more color to, I've got to find a kind of fleshy color now. Once I've added this pink sort of area in the inside of the bottom of the eyelid to make that, and then I'll probably add a bit more eyeliner underneath it, just so that it looks like you know, that person has added some makeup to the bottom there. Cool, so now that I've done that, I can start focusing on trying to find a colour that looks kind of fleshy, as sort of light pink, and then I'm just going to add, I'm going to paint all the way around and then turn this into a colour layer to make it just affect the area that I've drawn on. And then realistically, the last thing I need to do is just to add some highlights. And I'm just going to play with the opacity of my shading layer, just so that until I get it to an area that I think is more appropriate. And again, this is the bit that I struggle with at the moment, is getting those values right. But that'll do for now. So I can now start drawing in my highlights with a nice white pen. Start off with the tear duct, and now working on the iris. I tend to find less is more in this respect. I think some people maybe go a little bit too far with adding this, and some of the reference drawings that I've used is people have so many highlights in the eye that it just looks too bad. So I've gone with just sort of fairly minimalist there. And then I'll add a little bit of moisture onto the lower eyelid as well, just to make that look a bit more realistic as well. But that pretty much wraps up this drawing, guys. Thank you very much for watching. I hope you found it useful. I'm just going to add a little bit more highlight to the eye, to the skin and the bottom and top, but that's basically it. I'll see you in the next one. Thanks very much for watching, guys. Bye-bye.